I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Jack Sarfatti, a theoretical physicist specializing in advanced propulsion research. Jack has a PhD in physics from the University of California, taught physics at San Diego State University, worked with David Bohm at the University of London's Birkbeck College, and with Abdus Salam at the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy. Jack was the basis of the memorable time-traveling Dr. Emmett Brown in the Back to the Future trilogy, and the author of Supercosmos, Destiny Matrix, Space Time and Beyond 2, and the co-author with Fred Allen Wolf and Bob Tobin of Space Time and Beyond Toward an Explanation of the Unexplainable. So Jack, welcome back. Today we are going to dig into this July congressional hearing with testimony by UFO whistleblowers Ryan Graves, David Grusch, and David Fravor. So overall, what are your impressions of the hearing and the testimony that we heard presented?
Well, I think it was pretty good. I'm not sure if I should give it a B plus or an A minus. It was excellent. I mean, in terms of what Commander Fravor, Ryan Graves, and David Grusch said about the evidence, I accept all that. In fact, I have independent confirmation of the essential parts of this, of at least what David Grusch is saying. In particular, that there's an intact. I know of at least one intact flying saucer, from a first-hand source. I don't know. Did David say he had a first-hand source? He had just seen documents. Did he say he actually spoke to people who had contact with the saucers? I don't recall if he actually said that. Do you remember?
There was so much that came through in that hearing, and over the last month. I mean, all of this really started back at the beginning of June. So this has only kind of been out there for 2 months. I believe he has said that he had people approach him and talk with him about things, and then I also believe he has documentation. And one of the things that I should point out is I heard him say in the hearing, for instance, he was willing to provide a list of cooperative and hostile witnesses, a lengthy one. And I guess he has also had several private classified hearings, at least 2. And I believe he said that those were like 11 hours each. So there's been a lot, right, that we're just not privy to yet.
Right, of course, yeah. And I do have information that basically backs him up, which also, for the same reason he can't say it. It's not that I've never signed any documents, but my source has signed documents, and I have to protect the source. But it's a first-hand source, and what I can say is that everything that's in the book by Colonel Corso, though it reads kind of like a grade B science fiction 1950s movie, but and I was always very skeptical of it until recently, a few years ago, and I have independent confirmation that basically every detail about the nature of the saucer that's in The Day After Roswell by Colonel Corso is correct. And one of the things I wrote, I said, the thing about the hand panels, that the saucer is empty inside. It's about 30 feet, 35 feet maybe, weighs about 1.5 tons, 3,000 pounds. And inside it's almost empty. There's no obvious propulsion mechanisms. There's just 3 small little seats, like for little kids, the grays, about maybe 3.5 feet tall. And with the panels, they control the ship with their electrical brain waves. I can confirm all that is true. Crazy as it sounds, I have independent, very reliable information. Of course, anything that that we think we know is subject to error, especially with scientific. I could be wrong, but my subjective confidence level that I'm not wrong in this is like 90%, 95%, because the source is very reliable. It's the person I'm working with, a very responsible person who's actually active military still, which is, and so I think it's true. Also, Rick Doty, who kind of has a controversial. He's not popular with some groups, but everything Rick Doty said, he was an Air Force intelligence.
Mm.
Everything Rick Doty says about the Cardinal Three also coincides with Colonel Corso's account in his book. And of course, we could have said that Rick Doty maybe read Corso's book, but my source never heard of Phil Corso, and gave me exactly the same information, totally independently, which is why now I take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that you have, and nobody else has this, is this has been an area of study for you. I mean, you have dove
Yeah.
into the physics. You have the credentials, you have the training, you have many people that you've worked with, and this goes back decades. And one of the things that intrigued me was you immediately said the other day when Ryan Graves described was it black cube inside of a clear sphere,
Yeah.
your first response was, well, it sounds exactly like he's describing a Visser cube. So I looked that up, but I'm wondering if you could describe what a Visser cube is for us.
Okay, it's basically okay. What that thing is, what I think it is, what it seems obvious to me intuitively, what I think it is. It's a vehicle. It's a warp drive ship like a Tic Tac, but it has dual function. It's also a Stargate portal. So in other words, you can go into that little cube and wind up maybe on an exoplanet somewhere else wherever they're coming from, or maybe the Earth in the future. So it's like a time. It's like time. Okay, it's exactly like Doctor Who's telephone
Yeah.
booth.
So it's a
So you go,
wormhole, more or less.
yeah. Well, it's the mouth. It's one end. It's a machine. It's a machine, but you step into it and you can go. Well, I don't know wherever they're from. You can go there. You can just go there in an instant. Just step through. It's like stepping through a doorway. Um, and that's funny. I just realized something. These intelligences, they've planted this information in the minds even of children. Because I remember now when I was about 6 or 7 years old, reading some little children's story. Through the mirror, you go through the mirror, and it was this is back in the 1940s, like mid 19 World War II era. Okay, so what this was really was it was right out of Viss's book. Viss actually has like a doorway. You could actually have a Stargate doorway in Matt Viss's book, Lorentzian Wormholes, and it's just like going like a doorway, and just go through it, and you're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Um, so all this is now, well, it seems magical and it seems, science fiction. It's not. It's not science fiction. It's reality.
Well,
Timothy,
yeah. I
Timothy
think,
Leary, action. It's like on the boundary between fiction and fact. But right now, with everything that's happening, I think all these things are actually reality, and our conception of reality is about to go through a tremendous transformation, kind of like childhood's end, in Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick. That kind of thing is actually happening, and it could be happening at a better time because we right now with the war in Ukraine, we're in an unstable situation. Things can go nuclear, and hopefully that these machines, these higher intelligences that are encountering U.S. naval forces, hopefully they're here to prevent anything crazy from happening. Of course, we don't know that, but at least it's a
yeah.
possibility.
Well, so these craft have been described, I believe in Congress, they described them as defying the laws of physics, right, during the
Yeah,
testimony.
yeah,
And that's basically another way of saying modifying the geodesic of time space. I mean, they're
yeah. Okay,
saying it can't possibly do what it does. But again, this is one of the amazing things about your work. This goes back decades. They
yeah.
are warping space and falling into it, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah. So whenever they say, it always gets my blood pressure up, whenever they say, oh, it defies the laws of physics. No, it doesn't. It actually is totally consistent with the laws of physics. It defies the laws of physics in the imperfect understanding In this case, it was David Fravor, and all the, almost everybody in the government, because they're not physicists. So, it's, I mean, yeah, I couldn't fly an F-18, land on the carrier the way David Fravor can. But of course, and of course, his practical knowledge of the kind of physics he needs to fly that machine through the air with that technology, of course, he's 100% on that. But this new technology, it's within the laws of known mainstream battle-tested physics called Einstein's general theory of relativity. Okay, from 1915. That's the basic physics plus quantum mechanics, the quantum physics, and somewhat now extended. But I won't go into details. I've extended to some degree, and what's happened is that I'm now working with a guy named Jose Rodel. He's originally, I guess, from Argentina, but he has a PhD from the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Aeronautical, maybe aerospace engineering. And he's about maybe, I don't know, he's almost maybe a little bit younger than me, but he's an old guy. He's retired, basically. He was the head of some kind of research branch of a big German company. And so he's working actively with me. And we've basically, actually the last week or so, we've had a couple of breakthroughs, and we're really pinpointing how these machines fly in terms of Einsteinian physics. We've made a lot of progress, and we're also working with on friendly terms with Travis Taylor, who works for Jay Stratton, who was the head of the Naval Intelligence for this stuff. And Travis has agreed now to inform his, he knows people in the committees that did this recent investigation that we all saw. And so he's going to get our information to them, because they don't have the information yet. The physics information they have is very limited. It's not good enough. So we're hoping to get in touch with them. In fact, we are.
Yeah, and I understand that you're working on actually kind of an extended PowerPoint in collaboration with some of your partners. You mentioned Jose Rizal, Travis Taylor, and a few other people. In fact, one of the people we're working with, he's not a physicist, but he's a retired lieutenant or commander, naval commander, a lawyer. He's kind of my legal advisor, and the JAG from JAG. He's retired, also around my age. And but his father was a close friend of Congressman Tim Burchett's father, I guess, both in the Navy. It was like World War II, right? So that's a good. So in any case, so we're going to be connecting with that congressman who's really into this stuff. So I think within the next few weeks, the situation in terms of the understanding of the technology, the basic understanding of how these things are flying, that will get this information to the people in the American government who need to know it. Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I did research on, and I think that this is really important, because for so many people, this is all new, right? For people who follow this closely, they're familiar with the backstory, but certainly in Congress, I think that they're probably being sideswiped by all of this. I think for a lot of people who are hearing about this for the first time, they're just kind of, it's a shock. And so one of the things I wanted to point out for people, as you mentioned, your work is all rooted in mainstream relativity physics, right? It's very well supported. And that's important because relativity is gravitational physics, right? That's the one you use if you're modifying gravity. The other thing is some of the people that you've worked with over the years, and I know some of these personally, are like Doctors Leonard Susskind, Martin Rees, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff. You mentioned Jose Rodal. I know that you're also working a little bit with Brian Josephson, Raymond Chow, James Woodward. And these are folks that you actively work with. I see them in the discussion list, as well as Saul Paul Sarag, John Kramer, David Chester, Clee Irwin, Nick Herbert, Fred Allen Wolf, Keith Wanzer, David Kaiser, and that's just to name a few. So for
But
anyone who thinks,
let me mention the ones who are really important when I was a student, okay, the ones who really influenced me, okay, my Cornell professors who built the atomic bomb with Oppenheimer, Hans Bethe, Nobel Prize, was my senior advisor at Cornell. And he was head of theoretical physics division, Los Alamos, under Oppenheimer. Phil Morrison, another undergraduate advisor. Dale Corson. You look up these names. Robert Wilson, who then headed the Batavia, the National Batavia, the big accelerator near Chicago. People like that. Mark Kotz, Paul Olam, Wolfgang Rindler, and then later John Wheeler. I got to Richard Feynman. I spent over a month with Werner Heisenberg in Munich and with John Wheeler, 1966. Okay, so and then David Bohm, Abdus Salam in Trieste, Keith Bruckner, who's the head of the Jasons, the defensive Jasons at UCSD in La Jolla, Herbert Froelich. These are really giants, and these, let's put it this way, I spent enough time with all these people to kind of see how they think, how they approach physics. This like what Michael Polanyi, I think a Polish philosopher of science, called tacit knowing. So I'm picking up how they look at reality. See, and these were like giants in physics.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I wanted to point out, and again, I'm just saying this by the benefit of having been on your list for a while, is this isn't like Jack pulls a theory out of a hat and says, this is how it works. This has been something back and forth discussion for years with these physicists.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, so one of the things that I should get into is there's this idea of, again, we're defying physics. Can these things work? I mean, when you get into stuff like ablation, right, from, atmospheric.
Yeah, none of that's going to happen. We don't have, those are all, see, okay, the big thing to understand is warp drive. It's warp drive. Warp drive, it's not matter going through air. There's no friction. There's no reentry. There's none of that. There's no ablation. See, and they're not seeing that. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's the biggest thing for people. They can't wrap that around their heads. They think it's stuff going through air. The ship is freely falling through a gravitational field that it itself is shaping and controlling so it can go wherever it wants to go. And all the air molecules near the boundary of the ship, they're freely falling with it. So there's no relative motion between, say, the metal surface of the ship and the air in contact or close to it. Everything is falling together. In fact, Paul Hill, in his book, Paul Hill, okay, this book was written, I guess, in the 50s, in the early 50s, and he was what was then NASA, wasn't called NASA. He was an aerospace engineer. This is like right soon after World War II. And he was going through all the data of the flying saucers, the Foo Fighters, all that stuff that they had. And he actually came up with the idea of warp drive. But he was an engineer. He didn't know any general relativity. There's nothing about Einstein in his book on unidentified flying objects. I forget the title of it. Hal Puthoff wrote a nice review of it. It's online. He calls it the acceleration field. And he shows that it doesn't have any ablation problems, none of these things. So none of that's a problem. These machines, they can slowly take off from the ground. They can hover on the ground like they do. They can hover, like Commander Fravor was talking about, is hovering in strong, hurricane force winds, did he say at one point? So it can do all that, it can do whatever it wants, and then it can go slowly up out into space, whatever, or it can go under the water, and it can travel 500 miles an hour under the water. It can track our nuclear submarines, and apparently we have evidence that it can neutralize our nuclear missiles. There's a lot of evidence of that. I think Grusch may have mentioned it briefly, and all that's real. And fortunately, as far as I know, it's happening to the Russians too. So this is not Russian technology; it's not Chinese
Yeah.
technology. It's well, I know some of it is coming from the future. Okay, got to say this: if you can control gravity, then you control time. Because gravity is the space-time field. It's a dynamical
Yeah.
field, electromagnetic field. So with what we're talking about, we're able to control what we're seeing. These machines are controlling their local gravitational field inside the material structures of their fuselages, their metamaterial fuselage. They're controlling their local gravity field with very tiny amounts of energy. I mean, we see that because they're very stealthy. The heat signatures that you can see, you can see them with the infrared, but they're not giving off a lot of heat. In fact, when you had Kevin Knuth, who's talking about just conventional motion, and when they see these things that it looks like it's going, 500 G, 5,000 G, or something like that, that would generate a tremendous amount of heat if it was an ordinary motion. And none of that, they don't see, none of that's happening. So that means it's warp drive. Also, the shape shifting, that's called gravitational lensing, it's the bending of light by the gravitational field. And since it's very dynamic, I mean, the shapes can look very crazy, and they do. There are all these. By the way, if you look on the YouTube, there's all kinds of photographs, videos of what really look like real flying saucers, and the shapes are very, very bizarre, which is consistent with it being warp drive, gravitational lensing, because the gravitational field is changing so rapidly that the patterns of what the images look like, are very bizarre.
Well, yeah, and so there is one the Puerto Rico sighting, and the name escapes me, but in that one that was captured by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, and it looks like the UAP actually splits in two and then comes back
that's
together.
Gravitational lensing. That had multiple images.
Yeah. Now, so one of your giant, I guess, contributions to this is the idea of gravitational metamaterials, right? And that allows this warp drive to work without these incredible power requirements, right? That have been proposed for the standard.
Whole point. That's the whole point. Yes. I must say back, if you read David Kaiser's book, How the Hippies Saved Physics, bestseller, 2011, David Kaiser's MIT professor of physics, a Harvard PhD. I think he's the head of now the MIT program on science and history of science and technology, stuff like that. And he mentions how the CIA really recruited us, and Hal Puthoff was for Russell Targ, it's all a CIA project. And I was kind of pulled into that under very strange circumstances. And basically, one of the guys said, an Army guy, actually, Army is like from a very prominent family. And he said, and he was funding us. He said, Jack, there are two things, the two most important things the Central Intelligence Agency wants to know is how does consciousness work? And that's in David Kaiser's book. And how do flying saucers fly? This is like let's see, this was about 1970, the end of 75, around 1975. And of course, I had already been with Hal Puthoff and these guys in 1973. And those meetings were actually, you hear that meeting on the internet, my first meeting with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, and talking about flying saucers as time machines from the future. It's all there. And it's all being recorded by the CIA, and it's online. You can actually, it was actually a very long meeting. It's about an hour of it online. But you could hear all these crazy things there.
Well, so do you have any expectations about what we might see in the next few months in terms of the hearings? And again, this is a topic that you have followed so closely. So
yeah, no, I don't. It all depends on. It all depends on whether the information we're talking about gets to the right people. And I think in the next few days, supposed to get there. All right, isn't there another meeting next week for the Senate or something? I was told there's another meeting next week, I think. In any case, Jose Rodal worked very hard this weekend, and we prepared an executive summary for Congressman Burchett. Oh, what's interesting is that this is a bipartisan issue,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, you have the Democrats and even the extreme, Cortez, Miss Cortez, and on the one side, and Matt Gaetz on the other side. Who are, normally they're fighting each other, but on this they're all cooperating, so that's a good sign. It's in the spirit of RFK Jr. wants to bring everybody together and be, not attack each other, which is a good idea. So maybe this will help bring the country together, which would be very nice if that happens.
Well, and the part that got me was when AOC leaned over and started asking questions to David Grusch, um, the sincereness of her questions, and they were very good questions. And I thought,
Yeah, yeah,
you know what? She has really put a lot of thought into this. This is a big, important, like it's important to the national conscience and national psyche at this point, I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot. And then I think once the fact finding is further along, I think then we're going to have to start to really dig into the physics. And I believe that's going to bring people directly back to yourself as well as this
Oh yeah, we have
massive
physics. We've solved. Let me say it very. We've solved the physics problem. When I say that, we understand what's going on. We understand basically how they work. And now it's just a question of engineering, mopping up operation, engineering details. I always like to make the analogy. It's like 1942. Everybody understands that a nuclear bomb is possible. Hitler gets Heisenberg, who I knew personally. Yeah, not Hitler, Heisenberg, to try to make the bomb. And our guys, my professors my professors are all in Los Alamos trying to make the bomb. We're at that same place now. We understand the basic physics of it is very simple. It's not difficult. It's not difficult for students at Caltech or MIT or Oxford, Cambridge, University of London, people who have studied general relativity in the right way. They can say, so that's what's going on. Why didn't I think of it? It's very simple. But now how to engineer that, which means how to make the metamaterials have the desired resonant properties when you excite them with electromagnetic fields, how to do that, of course, that's not trivial. And to now go back to what who was saying, I guess what Chris Mellon even was saying, that if we get these, if they would, I guess it was Abby Loeb. Abby Loeb was saying that keeping this stuff compartmentalized and secret, not letting the best physicists, work on this thing, we could reverse engineer this very quickly now, especially with all the instruments that, like Gary Nolan, Abby Loeb, they have all the stuff. So if they just get the real materials, in fact, I know there's an intact saucer, right? Okay, there's an intact saucer, and my guy was trying to figure out, they wanted him to figure out the propulsion system.
Okay.
Okay. But he was not allowed to talk to the metallurgist trying to figure out how the material was made.
Yeah.
You understand? So this is why they couldn't, this is why they failed. That's why they failed, because the stupid compartmentalization, they don't understand how science works. And that's the problem, the bureaucratic, the stupidity barrier. We could probably reverse engineer this thing in a year or two if we had access to the materials. When I say we, I mean, guys like Avi Loeb and Gary Nolan, Larry Lemke. There's all kinds of people who can figure this out. Oh, by the way, we should mention what's happened in Korea. The room temperature superconductivity, if that turns out to be true.
Yeah, yeah, and that,
because these things, I do know this. That these materials are room temperature superconductors.
Okay.
Okay, that you need that to get the warp drive to work, and there's something called the Froelich condensate effect, which is a version, is what's called a non-equilibrium room temperature superconductor. But if these guys in Korea are able to do it at thermodynamic equilibrium, that's even better. That's good. Maybe it's not true. We don't know if it's true yet.
And my reading on that actually, and I could be mistaken, I'm still learning about it, but so in the past, you had room temperature, but not ambient pressure. You had to put a tremendous force on the crystal lattice, and if I
Yeah, which is
understand,
impractical. Yeah,
yeah,
impractical.
so they substituted, they substituted atoms in the crystal lattice, which leads to shrinkage, and the lattice itself creates the pressure for
Yeah, and you know
superconductivity.
what? To me, I haven't read the paper in detail yet, and what I'm about to say may be totally wrong. I'm just winging it intuitively. When I was at Harwell, Her Majesty's Atomic Energy Research Establishment, back in 1966, I would go back and forth between La Jolla, UCSD, and La Jolla, Harwell. I was at with Werner Heisenberg at the Max Planck Institute in Munich and Schwabing. And any case, I worked with a guy. I was also going down to Imperial College to see Abdus Salam and Goldstone and these guys. And so I was learning about spontaneous broken symmetry that they were, the Higgs mechanism, that they were working on back then, 1966. So I kind of picked up on that. And I was I was in the theoretical physics division at Harwell, which is like Lawrence Livermore back then. They'd say nuclear weapons, nuclear reactor thing. And I was with this young guy named Marshall Stoneham, and this thing called the Jan Teller effect. And we wrote a paper on the Jan Teller effect, which is what they're talking about. I'm pretty sure with this room temperature superconductor, it's how the strain in the lattice,
Yeah.
how strains in the lattice. It was Edward Teller, Edward Teller, this guy who thought of this, that if you strain the lattice, distort the lattice a certain way, you create what's called the Goldstone effect, which is a kind of room temperature superconducting effect. So this paper, one of my first papers, I wrote it with Marshall Stoneham. It's in the Proceedings of the Physical Society of London in 1966 or maybe 1967, around that time. And that may be the basic physics, but that these Koreans are talking about.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
so if we have room temperature superconductivity, but that doesn't get us all the way to gravitational metamaterials, right? That's kind of a step further along.
No, it's necessary but not sufficient. Let's put it this way: it will greatly speed up the process. If what they have is real, it's going to speed up the process because we need what's called long-range coherence in the metamaterial to amplify the coupling between the applied voltages, the applied electromagnetic field, and the output warp field, the gravity warp field. We need that.
Okay.
So essential parts. I think, and it's interesting that it's all like happening at the right time. It's like this thing, it's no coincidence. So let's hope that what they're saying works out, because it's actually pretty simple what they're doing. They're almost like alchemy. They're mixing stuff in the mortar vessel, throwing in the powders.
And it's all common elements too. That got
all
me. I
common
believe
elements.
it was like lead and what was it? Lead, copper, and iron, if I remember right.
Something like that. Now the thing is this. Now, of course, they're doing it in a primitive way with modern techniques and with the metamaterial, with the nanotechnology. We could probably greatly improve what they have, for our purposes. So, and of course, even without the gravitational propulsion, having room temperature superconductor is going to totally change everything. I mean, for the better.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it would increase efficiency of everything, right? You're talking about electric cars, electrical distribution systems, transformers, just the whole 9 yards. So
it'll basically solve. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if the climate, the world is heating up right now. It seems that way. The climate is changing, but even if we're causing it because of fossil fuels, which I'm a little bit skeptical. I have my doubts about that. But even if that were the case, what we're trying to do to solve the problem is not going to work. So we need a real breakthrough. We need this room temperature superconductivity. We need to control the gravitational field with small amounts of energy that I'm talking about, that we see flying around, in the naval battle group airspaces, the Nimitz encounters, the Roosevelt encounters. We need that technology in order to escape the climate change problem, the world now seems to be heating up. Who knows? But the point is this: with this technology, we can transport billions of people in principle to an exoplanet, say an Earth like a virgin Earth like. Okay, so we could move. We could lower the population of Earth without killing everybody. If it turns out we have to do that. Well, suppose the sun suddenly is going to go supernova, and the Earth maybe is going to be destroyed. Now that's not supposed to happen for billions of years, but maybe some instability. Maybe it's going to happen sooner. So we need this technology. We need what Timothy Leary called SMILE, space migration, intelligence increase, life extension, and we got that now. The space migration is the gravitational control, small amounts of controlling gravity. The intelligence increase is all the AI, Sam Alp. Oh, but Sam Alp is my next door neighbor, the guy with chat here in Washington. He's literally next door. I haven't seen him yet because he's hardly ever there. But he's like his own fort. We're living in these little fortresses here. But he's my next door neighbor. Okay, and they got the chat AI, which I'm using that in my own work now. I'm actually using.
Oh, okay.
And life extension is all the CRISPR genetic engineering, CRISPR technology. We have it all now.
Yeah,
we have all the elements.
It's amazing to see all of it move forward. It's amazing to see all of it
happening. It's all coming together. So hopefully things will work out good. They're either going to work out good or we're going to have a nuclear war. So one or the other. Now, if you believe in the many worlds, like, if you've seen Amazon Prime, Philip Dick, Man in the High Castle, the parallel universes. So one universe, we all die. It's on the beach. That's one universe. The other universe, we're all living happily ever after, immortals, going out to the stars. It's Star Trek. So let's see which one is going to happen, or maybe they're all happening at once. If you believe Max Tegmark at MIT, they call him Mad Max Tegmark in the many worlds. A lot of these guys really believe that there's parallel universes, right? Oh, in fact, I should, just before we quit, the only thing David Grusch said that was wrong was when he tried to explain it in physics. He's like a bachelor's level in physics, maybe master's, not a PhD level. And he was talking about the higher dimensions, and he talked about Letty Susskind, the hologram theory. And I worked with Letty in 1963 to 64 at the beginning of his career, beginning of both our careers at Cornell. But it's not high dimension. It's actually, the hologram theory is the opposite of what David Grusch said.
Lower dimensions.
It's lower dimensions. The hologram plate's a two-dimensional plate that projects a higher dimensional, three-dimensional image. Okay, so, but he was confusing it with what's called brain theory. Doesn't matter, because everything else he said is right on, 100%. Okay, this is the theory. He's not a theoretical physicist like I am.
Yeah. Well, and that's why your work is so valuable. That's why this large group, and I think the one thing that I would like to remind people of is you guys have been diligently working on this for decades. It is not the work of one person. It is the work of a large group of PhD experienced theoretical physicists. That's very important to point out. Yeah, we have a pretty good team now. Yes, and also and we're also working with the Italians, and about going back to Italy. Oh, in fact, you filmed it. Yes. So, okay. So there we are. Did we cover everything? Yeah. Jack, thank you so much for your time today. It is truly an honor. And we will all just kind of hold our breath and see what comes out as this story continues to evolve. Yeah, exactly.